Professor Yoda towered over her students, all 8 of her appendages poised in the traditional Kryptonian stance of academic authority. The blue-tinted atmosphere of Training Dome 7 hummed with nervous energy as 23 of the galaxy's brightest young minds, representing 17 different species, shifted uncomfortably. Today's survival challenge is simple, the professor announced, her voice translator perfectly modulating the clicks and whistles of her native tongue, using only the materials provided construct a shelter capable of withstanding standardized environmental threats. You have 1 standard galactic hour. The assembled students studied the pile of strange materials at the center of the dome, the synthetic polymers, adaptive metals, bioresponsive fabrics, and various tools unfamiliar to most species outside specialized engineering fields. Off to the side stood Tony Stark, the only human in the advanced Xeno survival course at the Hogwarts Academy. He seemed unremarkable bipedal, light-skinned with a mop of dark hair, and the typical 2 arms and legs a species was known for. Unlike his classmates who boasted natural armor, multiple limbs, or enhanced sensory organs, Tony looked decidedly unimpressive. "Begin now," Professor Yoda announced, activating the hovering chronometer. The students scrambled forward, tentacles and claws and manipulator fields grabbing for the choicest materials. The Vulcan students immediately began analyzing the chemical composition of each component. The Wookiees, with their forearms, started constructing elaborate framework models in the air. The Jedi twins merged into their collective form to better process the challenge parameters. Tony walked calmly to the pile, studying it for precisely 30 seconds. Then, to everyone's surprise, he turned and walked away from the main supply cache toward the edge of the dome. Professor Yoda's eyes swiveled to track him. "Student Stark, the materials for the exercise are centrally located." Tony nodded respectfully. "Yes, Professor. I see them." He knelt down and began examining the base plate connections where the dome attached to the Academy's foundation. With quick practice movements, he pulled a small multi-tool from his pocket stand or human gear that most species considered charmingly primitive and began manipulating something at the junction. Within 3 minutes, Tony had detached an access panel and crawled halfway inside the maintenance shaft. The other students had barely sorted their materials when Tony emerged, dragging a standard emergency shelter pack, the kind required by galactic safety regulations to be installed at regular intervals throughout all educational facilities. The professor's skin flushed a deep purple of surprise. "That is not part of the provided materials, Student Stark." "With respect," Professor Tony replied, already deploying the shelter with practice motions. "You specified materials provided. This shelter is provided by the Academy for emergencies. The challenge parameters didn't restrict us to only the centrally placed materials." Before the professor could formulate a response, Tony had fully deployed the shelter, a perfect hexagonal structure that unfolded with pneumatic hisses. He tapped the activation panel and stepped back as the shelter ran its automated diagnostics, confirming protection against atmospheric contamination, radiation, temperature extremes, and even moderate projectile impacts. The chronometer showed barely 10 minutes had elapsed. The other students stopped their work, multifaceted eyes and sensory organs, all focused on the human and his completed shelter. Even the hive mind Klingon seemed impressed, their collective consciousness vibrating with surprise. Professor Yoda approached the shelter, running a sensor appendage over its surface. "This is adequate," she admitted reluctantly. "Though hardly demonstrates the engineering principles this exercise was meant to convey," Tony smiled. "Professor, you've been teaching us that survival doesn't reward the most elegant solution, just the most effective one. Humans don't pride ourselves on unnecessary complexity." The professor's translator took a moment to process this before she responded. "Indeed, though, I would argue your solution demonstrates a different kind of intelligence altogether. We call it working smarter, not harder," Tony explained. "Thousands of years ago, we were just clever apes using sticks to get termites, that we've learned that innovation often means looking beyond the obvious." The professor's color slowly returned to normal as her 8 limbs performed the gesture of academic acknowledgement. Class observed student Stark's demonstration of lateral problem solving. While unconventional, it represents a fundamental truth. Intelligence manifests in recognizing existing solutions rather than needlessly creating new ones. Tony nodded, hiding his smile. He'd survived another day at the Hogwarts Academy, where being human with no exceptional physical attributes beyond pattern recognition and practical ingenuity continued to confound and occasionally impress the most advanced species in the universe. The human approach, sometimes the most sophisticated solution, was the simplest one, hiding in plain sight all along.